Welcome, welcome to another episode of Lit with Lenin Reloaded. Let's just wait a few minutes for others to get on. But I
Mhm.
guess we were talking about Israel and Glenn Greenwald. So Glenn Greenwald went on Tucker Carlson and criticized Israel. And suddenly, Israel sent out a video of him engaging in sexual intercourse with a male prostitute, maybe. It's a pretty interesting how Israel has so much
Mhm.
compromising intelligence on so many people.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it it just shows everything that everyone's been saying, like they have stuff on people and that's why no one speaks against them. It kind of, a little bit.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that we all knew about Jeffrey Epstein because his alleged hedge fund had actually no hedge fund and no business and nothing. And yet he was a billionaire and he was like hanging out with all the bigwigs, and all of them flew in his jet, like Bill Clinton, Governor of Mexico, New Mexico, Bill Richardson, Bill Gates, uh, Trump.
Yeah, they're all a bunch of actors and actresses and like so
Yeah,
Hollywood. It's like there's just so many people. And then were they were supposed to um put something out like Trump said he was putting something out and then they're like, no, we're not going to do it. So it's like, so who are they protecting? We know that Trump's on the plane and stuff. He's
okay. Well, we have 25 people on Twitter, so let's start.
okay. All right.
Okay, so we are still on what are the friends of the people, what the friends of the people are and how they fight the social democrats. So it's a reply to an article in Ruskaya Bogatstvo, which means Russian wealth. And I mean, that's kind of like the Economist of today, I guess.
Yeah.
And to the point number 2. After this criticism of dialectics, Mr. Michalowski imputes these methods of proving things by means of Hegelian triads to Marx, and of course victoriously combats them. Regarding the future, he says, the immanent laws of society are based purely on dialectics. This is the exception referred to above. Marx's argument on the inevitability of the expropriation of the expropriators by virtue of the laws of development of capitalism are purely dialectical. Marx's ideal of the common ownership of land and capital in the sense of the inevitability and indubitability rests entirely at the end of the Hegelian three-term chain. Not quite, because what Marx says is happening. There's the contradiction of capital where the wealth becomes more and more concentrated into fewer and fewer hands and more people become miserable. And we've seen that happening, like Amazon, for example. With that, eventually, if there is enough of a critical mass of extremely miserable people, they will band together and be like, why are we giving that jackass money? We should just own our own factories and pay ourselves better. And that's the ideal. So it has nothing to do with Hegelian synthetics, dialectics, and counter. What's the other third term? Counter synthetic, the Hegelian triangle. What's the third term, Janet, on the Hegelian triangle?
Synthesis and
T synthesis
and
I can't remember.
I know. I'm like, I just looked at it last week.
There's a book right there on Hegel, right over there. I could quickly pop up.
And then
there.
just the thesis, right? And then
okay. Thesis, synthesis, antithesis.
I thought it had to be something bigger because I'm sitting there going, the thesis.
Okay. So the thesis is that, according to Michalowski, the thesis here is that the proletarians will take over. No. The synthesis is proletarians take over. What is that's not what Marx said. He said like the material conditions will make it so that this is inevitable.
Yeah.
But this is where I worry, because it will be a time when the bourgeoisie don't need people anymore. Everything will be done by robots. So for for them to prevent a Marxist revolution, they will want genocide. So that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, I mean, it like I think on that too. It's like, God, we gotta move quick, but not there. Like there's no class consciousness. Like, that is totally lost in a lot of places. But like, yeah, I kind of worry about the AI moving too fast. But I mean, at this point, they need humans to. They can't rely on just AI at this point. But it's not like it's not moving fast. I mean, we know what's happened over the last 30 years in technology. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, it's probably not going to move that fast, but that's a very interesting to think about. I mean, they still need child minors in Congo. They need the like even though farming has been, there's a lot of machinery in farming, they still need people to pick there's some tasks that they haven't done yet.
Yeah, that they haven't really fixed. And then everyone's also, yay, we're only gonna work so many hours a day, and then we won't work.
Well, under socialism, yes, but we're not under socialism for most of the world.
Exactly. Like if we don't have that in place, then most of us, 90% of us in the world, are not useful to the 10%.
Exactly. This argument is taken in its entirety from Dühring, who expounds it in his Kritisches Geschichte der Nationalneue Ökonomie und des Sozialismus. Okay, I forgot German numbers already. Okay. But Mr. Mikhailovsky says not a word about Dühring. Perhaps incidentally, he arrived independently at this way of garbling Marx. Engels gave a splendid reply to Dühring, and since he also quotes Dühring's criticism, we shall confine ourselves to Engels' reply. Further in on the text, page 168 to 173 of the present volume, V.I. Lenin cites an extract from Frederick Engels' Anti-Dühring, Part 1, Philosophy, Chapter 13, Dialectics, Negation of Negation. The reader will see that it fully applies to Mikhailovsky. This historical sketch of the genesis of so-called primitive accumulation of capital in England is relatively the best part of Marx's book, says Dühring, and would even be better if it had not relied on the dialectical crutch to help out its scholarly crutch. Dialectical crutch, scholarly crutch? The Hegelian negation of the negation in default of anything better and clearer has in fact to serve here as the midwife to deliver the future of the womb of the past. The abolition of individual property, which has existed since 16th century, has been effected in a way indicated above, is the first negation. Marx never said abolishing individual property. He talked about abolishing private property, as in property owned by large latifundas that has thousands of slaves.
That is a big thing that people don't get. They think they're coming for your toothbrush. No. No.
There was a really funny meme on TikTok where somebody's like, yeah, I have all these toothbrushes. Yeah, they're not no. They're not even coming for your house if yours is a single house that you just live in, or you can even rent a room to a student in your single house. They're coming for the LaSalle real estate developers, or Bill or the Queen of England, those big real estate developers.
Yeah.
But in a higher form, based on common ownership of land and of the instrument of labor. Here, Marx calls this the new individual property, also social property. And in this, there appears the Hegelian higher unity in which the contradiction is supposed to be sublated, aufgehoben, a specific Hegelian term. Can you look it up in the German dictionary while that is to say that in the Hegelian verbal jugglery, both overcome and preserved. According to this, the expropriation of the expropriators is, as it were, the automatic result of historical reality in its material external relations. It would be difficult to convince a sensible man of the necessity of common ownership of land and capital on the basis of credence in Hegelian word juggling, such as negation of the negation. But nebulous hybrids of Marx's conception will not, however, appear strange to anyone who realizes what nonsense can be concocted with Hegelian dialectics as the scientific basis, or rather what nonsense must necessarily spring from it. For the benefit of the reader who is not familiar with these artifices, it must be pointed out expressly that Hegel's first negation is the how do you pronounce this word?
Sorry, I was
How do you
looking at the
pronounce
other
this
thing.
word?
Where are we at?
Catechismal.
Cataclysmic. Is it something like
Catechismal. He's a catechismal.
Catechismal. Yeah, catechismal.
Idea of the fall from grace, and his second is that of a higher unity leading to redemption. The logic of the facts can hardly be based on this nonsensical analogy borrowed from Marx from the religious sphere. Here Marx remains cheerfully in the nebulous world of his property, which at once both individual and social, and leaves to his adepts to solve for themselves this profound dialectical enigma. Thus far, Herr Düring.
Yeah. So the Aufgehoben is the word. This is the word. This is the word that everyone, like even ACP, tries to use it like, to sublate, to suspend, because it can mean so many different things. It can mean to lift up, but also to abolish. Like it has like an opposite meaning. And so this is where there's like such a contention in what Engels actually meant with it. Because normally we'll say abolish for that word.
Got it.
But it could mean to sublate or suspend or cancel. Like it could mean not so much like to suspend and there's also a meaning of to lift up with it. So it gets confusing, but we've always used it, like, I mean, as far as I know, and as far as like most Marxist Leninists have used as abolish, but it doesn't have like an English translation.
Okay, got it. So Engels concludes Marx has no other way of proving the necessity of the social revolution of establishing the common ownership of land and of the means of production produced by labor, except using Hegelian negation of the negation. And because he bases his socialist theory on these nonsensical analogies borrowed from religion, he arrives at the result that in the society of the future, there will be a dominant and ownership at once both individual and social as the Hegelian higher unity of the sublated contradiction. So this is what the footnote says. That this formulation of Düring's views applies fully to Mr. Michalowski is proved by the following passage in his article, Karl Marx being tried by Y. Zhukovsky. Objecting to Mr. Zubovsky. They must have been Zubovsky's assertion that Marx is a defender of private property. Mr. Michalowski refers to this scheme of Marx's and explains it in the following manner. In his scheme, Marx employed two well-known tricks of Hegelian dialectics. Firstly, the scheme is constructed according to the laws of Hegelian triad. Secondly, the synthesis is based on the identity of opposites, individual and social property. That's not the synthesis. It's based on who owns the means of production, but whatever. This means the word individual here has a specific, purely conditional meaning of the term of the dialectical process, and absolutely nothing can be based on it. This was said by a man possessed of the most estimable intentions, defending in the eyes of the Russian public the sanguine Marx from the bourgeoisie, Mr. Zhukovsky. And with these estimable intentions, he explains Marx as basing his conception on the process of tricks. Mr. Michalowski may draw from this what is for him the not unprofitable moral that whatever the matter in hand, estimable intentions alone are rather inadequate. But
Hey,
let the negation. Yeah.
hold on 1 second. I don't know if it's your computer screen is just like flashing stuff, but
No,
your
it's my camera.
camera's
Give me
going
one
weird. I just didn't know if that was gonna bother anyone's eyes or something.
No, it's not the camera. It's the sunlight.
Okay.
Um,
I know my light does weird things because I have it plugged in on a USB, and every once in a while it flickers. So I switched it off my computer because it was on my computer. So now I have it on a USB that's plugged right in.
well, here the sun stopped setting, so it seems like some. Okay, so there's a window.
Yeah.
So there's a window here, and then the window seems to. The sun seems to be like there's trees, so the tree
yeah, so it's going
moves,
through.
and then the sunlight gets blocked and unblocked.
Yeah. Hey, sorry.
No worries. But let the negation of the negation rest for a moment, and let us have a look at the ownership, which is at once both individual and social. Here, Düring characterizes these as a nebulous world, and curiously enough, he is really right on this point. Unfortunately, however, it is not Marx, but Herr Düring himself who is in this nebulous world. Marx can put Marx right a la Hegel by imputing to him the higher unity of property, of which there is not a word in Marx. Marx says it is a negation of the negation. This does not reestablish private property for the producer, but gives him individual property based on the acquisitions of the capitalist era, on cooperation and the possession of in common of the land and the means of production. The transformation of scattered private property arising from individual labor into capitalist private property is naturally a process incomparably more protracted and violent and difficult than the transformation of capitalistic private property, already practically resting on socialized production, into socialized property. That's all. The state of the things brought about through the expropriation of the expropriators is therefore characterized as the re-establishment of individual property, but on the basis of social ownership of the land and of the means of production produced by labor itself. To anyone who understands German and Russian too, Mr. Michalowski, because the translation is absolutely correct. This means that social ownership extends to the land and the other means of production, and the individual ownership to the products. That is the articles of consumption. And in order to make the matters more comprehensible, even to children of 6, Marx assumes on page 56 and 30 on the Russian edition, a community of free individuals carrying their work with the means of production in common, which the labor power of all the different individuals is consciously applied as the combined labor power of the community. That is a society organized on on a socialist basis. He continues, the total product of our community is a social product. One portion serves as means of production, as fresh means of production, and remains social. But another portion is consumed by members as means of subsistence. A distribution of this proportion among them is consequently necessary. And surely that is clear enough for Herr Düring. The property, which is at once both individual and social, this confusing hybrid, this nonsense which necessarily springs from Hegelian dialectics, this nebulous world, this profound dialectical enigma which Marx leaves his adepts to solve for themselves, yet is another free creation on the imagination and demanded on the part of Herr Düring. But what role, Engels continues, does the negation play in Marx? On page 791, in the following pages, Russian edition 648. He sets out from the final conclusion which he draws from the preceding 50 pages of economic and historical investigation into the so-called primitive accumulation of capital. Before the capitalist era, petty industry existed, and at least in England, on the basis of private property of the laborer in his means of production. The so-called primitive accumulation of capital consisted there in the expropriation of these immediate producers, that is, in the dissolution of private property based on the labor of its owner. This became possible because the petty industry referred to above is compatible only with the narrow and primitive bounds of production. Society, and at a certain stage, brings forth the material agencies for its own annihilation. This annihilation, the transformations of the individual and scattered means of production into socially concentrated ones, forms the prehistory of capital. So yeah, before capital, basically, if you're a weaver who is like spinning using the spinning wheel, you could hire like 5 people who could also have their own spinning wheels, like spinning themselves. But that didn't really change the property relations as much as having a spinning jenny.
Yeah, because at least you were there doing work too with them. if you bought a jenny and then you hired the workers, you're sitting back and doing nothing. So you're not even doing work.
That which is now to be as soon as the laborers turn into proletarians and their means of labor into capital, as soon as the capital mode of production stands on its feet, the further socialization of labor and further transformation of land and other means of production into capital, and therefore the further expropriation of private proprietors takes a new form. That which is now to be expropriated is no longer the laborer working for himself, but the capitalist exploiting many laborers. This expropriation is accomplished by the action of the immanent laws of capitalist production itself, and by the concentration of capital. One capitalist always kills many. Hand in hand with this concentration or this expropriation of many capitalists by few, develop an ever-extending scale, the cooperative form of labor process, the conscious technical application of science, the methodical cultivation of the soil, the transformation of the instruments of labor into instruments of labor only usable in common. So yeah, with the spinning jenny, you need like 50 people doing different things. Like, well, with the spinning wheel, you could just use one. So you always have to have like labor in common once you move.
Yeah. Also, I just want to bring up, like, this is the big libertarian thing where they think everyone could be a capitalist. Like,
no, because yes, they say that. Like, so it's not about working hard. It's about how close you're related to the King of England. The first factories were basically the King of England saying, you have exclusive right to own this factory and employ as many people as you want. And if anyone else does this, we'll send them to jail.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Queen of England, depending on what era. But yeah, basically, it kind of started out with everyone like spinning, like many households spinning their own wool, own yarn to make own cotton to make yarn.
Yeah.
But then once you got the spinning jenny, they were like, it could like make 50 spools of yarn in 1 hour, where it took like the labor with the spinning wheel like a whole day to make one spool. So they just kind of kicked them out of business. And then these people who went out of business need jobs. Where did they go? Oh, the factory.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just inevitable.
Yep.
Along with the constant diminishing number of magnates of capital who usurp and monopolize all the advantages of this process of transformation, grows the mass of misery, oppression, slavery, degradation, exploitation. But with this too grows the revolt of the working class, a class always increasing in numbers and disciplined, united, organized by the very mechanism of the process of capitalist production itself. Capital becomes a fetter upon the mode of production which has sprung up and nourished along with it and under it. Concentration of the means of production and socialization of labor at last reach a point where they become incompatible with their capitalist integument. This integument is burst asunder. The knell of capitalist private property sounds, the expropriators are expropriated. Now I ask the reader, where are the dialectic frills and mazes and the conceptual arabesques, where the mixed and misconceived ideas according to which is all one and the same thing in the end? Where the dialectical miracles for his faithful followers? Where are the mysterious dialectical rubbish and the maze in accordance with the Hegelian logos doctrine, without which Marx, according to Herr Düring, is unable to put his exposition into shape? Marx merely shows from history, and here states in a summarized form that just as formerly petty industry by the very development necessarily created the conditions of its own annihilation, So now the capitalist mode of production has likewise itself created the material conditions from which it must perish. The process is a historical one. If it is at least the same time the dialectical process, this is not Marx's fault, however annoying it may be to hear during. It is only at this point, after Marx has completed his proof on the basis of historical and economical facts, that he proceeds. The capitalist mode of appropriation. The result of the capitalist mode of production produces capitalist private property. This is the first negation of individual private property as founded on the labor of the proprietor. But the capitalist production begins with the inexorably of the law of nature, its own negation. It is the negation of the negation, and so on, as quoted above. Thus, by characterizing the process as a negation of the negation, Marx does not intend to prove that the process was historically necessary. On the contrary, only after he proved from history that, in fact, the process has partially already occurred and partially must occur in the future, he, in addition, characterizes it as a process which develops in accordance with the definite dialectical law. That is all. It is therefore once again a pure distortion of the facts by Herr Düring when he declares that the negation of the negation has to serve here as the midwife to deliver the future of the womb of the past, or that Marx wants anyone to be convinced of the necessity of the common ownership of land and capital on the basis of credence in the negation of negation. The reader will see that Engels' splendid rebuttal of Düring applies in its entirety to Mr. Michalowski, who asserts that with Marx, the future rests exclusively on the end of the Hegelian chain, and that the conviction of its inevitability can only be founded on faith. Footnote. It is worthwhile, I think, to note in this connection that the entire explanation given by Engels is contained in the same chapter which he discusses the seed, the teachings of Rousseau, and other examples of the dialectical process. It would seem that the absurdity of accusing Marxism of Hegelian dialectics would have been made quite evident by merely comparing these examples with the clear and categorical statements by Engels and Marx, to whom the manuscript was read before printing, and there can be no question of trying to prove anything by triads or of inserting the depiction of the real process of the conditional members of these triads. Lenin. The whole difference between Düring and Mr. Michalowski reduces itself to the following two small points. Firstly, Düring, despite the fact that he could not speak of Marx without foaming at the mouth, nevertheless considered it necessary to mention in the next section of history that Marx, in the afterword, categorically repudiated the accusation of Hegelianism. Mr. Michalowski, however, has nothing to say about the above quoted absolutely definite and clear statements by Marx on what he convinces the dialectical method to be. Secondly, another peculiarity of Mr. Michalowski is that he's concentrated all his attention on the use of tenses. Why, when he speaks of the future, does Marx use the present tense? Our philosopher demands with an air of triumph. You may find the answer to this in any grammar most worthy critic. You'll find that the present tense is used instead of the future when the future is regarded as inevitable and undoubted. But why? Why is it undoubted? Mr. Michalowski anxiously asks, desiring to convey such profound agitation as would justify distortion. But on this point, too, Marx gave an absolutely definite reply. You may consider it inadequate or wrong, but in case you must show how exactly and why exactly it is wrong, and not talk nonsense about Hegelianism. Time was when Mr. Michalowski not only knew himself what this reply was, but lectured others on it. Mr. Zhukovsky, he wrote in 1877, had good grounds for regarding Marx's conception of the future as conjectural, but he had no moral right to ignore the question of socialization of labor, to which Marx attributes vast importance. Well, of course, Zhukovsky in 1877 had no moral right to evade the question, but Mr. Michalowski in 1894 has this moral right. Perhaps quod licet Jovi non licet bovi. What does that mean? What Jove may do, the bull may not. Actually, yeah, and in Lenin's notes, it's often written in many languages. It's kind of weird. I cannot help here recalling here a strange notion of the socialization once expressed in Отечественные записки, which means fatherland notes. It's a literary magazine in St. Petersburg that started like 1890 something.
Did they call Russia fatherland or motherland?
They call it Otchestva, which means Отец means father. Otchestva is fatherland. Okay, so Отец is father in Russian. And fatherland is Отечество, which means Отечество is like land of the father, basically.
Okay. No, I just always thought, like, every time, you see it, they always call it motherland or something, like, when they're doing stereotypical Russian speakers.
Well, Россия is female. The word Россия is female, though.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting.
Yeah. And that's why World War II is called Великая Отечественная война, which means the Great Fatherland War.
Ah, okay. All right. Yeah, it was just interesting because I hear, like, the stereotype is always that they call it motherland, but
in Russian it's called fatherland because materi is mother, and Отец, Отечество is more related.
No, that's just a U.S. thing, probably.
In number 7, 1883, this magazine published a letter to the editor from a certain Mr. Postoronny. Okay, that's Michalowski using a different pen name, who, like Mr. Michalowski, regarded Marx's conception about the future as conjectural. Essentially, this gentleman argues the social form of labor under capitalism amounts to this, that several hundred or thousands of workers grind, hammer, turn, place under, pull, and perform numerous other operations under one roof. As to the general character of this regime, it is excellently expressed by saying, every man for himself and God for all. Where does the social form of labor come from? From the fact that they're all working on different parts of the factory to make one product?
Yeah.
As opposed to one person spinning their wheels or one potter?
From basically the beginning to the end. Well, I mean, except for the material that they got, but the beginning to the end of it, they do all the work. And then with the factory, you're only doing one little part of it. You're not creating something from beginning to end.
Like one person, like in the factory line, there's one person who, I don't know, pushes the yarn forward, and makes sure it's not twisted in the machinery, and the other person who pulls and cuts the cloth.
Yeah. One of those horrible Sutherland cartoons from the 50s, the anti-communist stuff. And they're explaining it. They use the dolls. Like, so someone does the eyes, someone does the hair, someone does, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm looking into ridiculous 1950s anti-communist propaganda.
Yeah.
And it's like so ridiculous. There's one that talks about freedom versus tyranny. And then it's like there's nothing specific. They're like, how many people
freedom?
Yeah. But then it's kind of like, let's look at society. How many people are respected and how many people are marginalized? And it's like, are you looking at your own society, United States?
There's a funny one. There was actually there's a documentary. It was a town. I can't remember where, like somewhere in the Midwest, like maybe Wisconsin or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But they for a day or a weekend or something, they played like they were, in Russia, like they were communists. And they put on a show. If you see that one, it's on the archive. It's pretty funny.
Yeah. But basically, it's just kind of like obscure. So if you're an owner of a mine and Lenin says, no more child labor. We're going to station Red Army soldiers outside this mine, and we're going to check to make sure every single one of them is over the age of 18. Yeah, if you're the mine owner, compared to the Tsar, which is like a free-for-all, yeah, it does look like tyranny. But to the people working in the mines, that does not look like tyranny, because now you're only working 8 hours. You have safety equipment. There are no 5-year-olds, 8-year-olds, etc.
Yeah. And people here are working 16 hours when they were working 8 hours. You know what I mean?
Okay. Daryl Davis explained. Okay. Rodina also means Rodina. Rodina is also a second word meaning homeland, and it is female. But Родственников in Russian means relatives. So Rodina is the land of my relatives, basically. But that is a female word, so he's right. Good catch, Theo. Yeah, and actually in World War II, like one of the slogans is "За Сталина и за Родина," as in for Stalin and for motherland.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
So
it did come from somewhere. Okay.
Places that are only places tend to be fatherland. Places that are also nations tend to be motherland. Then there are just states. I see now. Okay. He's right. Rodina is the second word. When you can see at once that the man has grasped what it is all about. The social form of labor amounts to working under one roof. No, the social form of labor can be people mining for iron ores somewhere in India, and then shipping those iron ores over to Indonesia to turn it into steel beams in a factory. Like that's just a bigger social form of labor. They don't have to work under one roof.
Yeah, and then those beams go to construction workers in the United States to make buildings.
So all three groups are under one social form. And when such preposterous ideas are expressed in one of the so far best Russian magazines, they still want to assure us that the theoretical part of capital is generally recognized by science. Yes, as it was unable to raise the slightest serious objection to capital, generally recognized science to begin to bow and scrape it, at the same time continuing to betray the most elementary ignorance and to repeat the old banalities of school economics. They taught economics in school in Tsarist Russia? We must dwell on this question somewhat in order to show Mr. Mikhailovsky that what is the essence of matter which he, by force of habit, has passed over entirely. The socialization of labor by capitalist production does not at all consist of people working under one roof. That is only a small part of the process. But in the concentration, and all of it being owned by the East India Tea Company or the West African Company,
the roof is the corporation.
Yeah, but in the context of being accompanied by specialization of social labor, by a decrease in the number of capitalists in each branch of industry and an increase in the number of separate branches of industry in many separate production processes being merged into one social production. So our steel beams example is the separate production process because, and of course, the steel beam, even if they were owned by different people, because there's only one buyer for the steel beams, because the buyer controls the shipping routes, the factory workers in the factory in Indonesia has to sell it at this point because they don't have any other buyers, and so on and so forth. When in the days of handicraft weaving, for example, the small producers themselves spun the yarn and made it into cloth, we had few branches of industry. Spinning and weaving were merged. But when the production becomes socialized by capitalism, the separate branches of industry increases. Cotton spinning is done separately, so is weaving. This very division and the concentration of production gives rise to new branches, machine building, coal mining, and so forth. Yeah, because with one person just spinning, they could just kind of ride their bicycle, like spinning wheel like a bicycle, and that would provide the power. Mm-hmm. But when you have like 50 people working on a jenny, you need the steam engines. So then you have a second branch of external, like coal miners who dig the coal up and send it over. And then the iron workers who need to send the iron in order to make the machines and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. The isolated small producers each performed several operations simultaneously and were therefore relatively independent of each other. When, for instance, the handicraftsman himself sewed flax and spun and wove, he was almost independent of others because he also grew his own cotton in his own farmland. It was this and only this regime of small dispersed commodity producers that justified the saying, every man for himself and God for all. That is an anarchy of market fluctuations. The case is entirely different under the socialization of labor that has been achieved due to capitalism. A manufacturer who produces fabrics depend on the core cotton yarn manufacturer. The latter is dependent on the capitalist planter who grows cotton, on the owner of the engineering works, the coal mine, and so on and so forth. The result is that no capitalist can get along without others. It is clear that the saying, every man for himself, is quite inapplicable to such a regime. Here, each works for all and all for each, and no room is left for God, either as a super mundane fantasy or as a mundane golden calf. The character of the regime changes completely. When during the regime of small isolated enterprises, work came to a standstill in any one of them, this affected only a few members of society. It did not cause any general confusion and therefore did not attract general attention or did not provoke public interference. But when works comes to standstill in a large enterprise, one engaged in a highly specialized branch of industry and therefore working almost for the whole society and in turn dependent on the whole society. For the sake of this simplicity, I take the case where socialization has reached a culminating point. Work is bound to come to a standstill in all the other enterprises of society because they can only obtain the products they need from this enterprise, and they can only dispose of their own commodities if its commodities are available. All the production processes thus merge into a single social production process. Yet each branch is conducted by a separate capitalist. Back then, things have changed now. It depends on him, and social products are his private property. It is not clear that the form of production comes into irreconcilable contradiction with the form of appropriation. It is not evident that the latter must adapt himself to the former and become social, and that is socialist. But the smart Philistine of Atechestvenia Zapisky reduces the whole work under one roof. Could anything be wider of the mark? I have described only material process, only the change in production relations, without touching on the social aspect of the process. The fact that the workers become united, wielded together, organized, since that is a derivative and secondary phenomenon. And speaking of how intertwined, Margaret Thatcher did a study on how long a society can survive if a certain branch of industry goes on strike. You know, what is the most, who needs to go on strike?
I don't know.
Garbage collectors. You can, they
really?
can survive 0 weeks without garbage collectors.
All right. You know what? I think that, okay. That sounds familiar now that you said it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the high, like, it was really funny. Like bankers, they were like infinite.
Yeah. I was thinking, like, the first thing that came to my mind was port workers, but I'm like, it's not going to be port workers.
No, it's garbage worker, because then it's like a big health hazard for everyone, and everyone's going to get sick from typhus. Yeah. So garbage collectors.
Talk to your garbage collectors.
Yeah, go talk to your and give him a copy of Lenin and Marx. And this Margaret Thatcher memo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. They run the world. Garbage collectors
of the world unite.
Have the power
to stop the world. Yeah. Okay, let's go.
You're at that reason.
The reason such elementary things have to be explained to the Russian Democrats is that they are so badly stuck in the mud of petty bourgeoisie ideas that to imagine anything but a petty bourgeoisie order of things is quite beyond them. And also, like, let's remember, 88% of Tsarist Russia back then was illiterate. So getting an education meant your social, like, you had to have this much wealth, basically. Like, even not even getting an education, learning how to read itself, like. So then when you're writing for like poofy magazines, you need to have a lot of disposable income. Okay, let me read some comments. Okay. Let us return to Mr. Michalowski. What objections did he make to the facts and arguments on which Marxists based the conclusion that the socialist system is inevitable by virtue of the very laws of capitalist development? Did he show that in reality, under a commodity organization of social economy, there is no growing specialization of the social labor process, no concentration of capital and enterprises, no socialization of the whole labor process? No, he did not advance a single argument in refutation of these facts. Did he shake the proposition that anarchy, which is irreconcilable with the socialization of labor, is an inherent feature of capitalist society? He said nothing about it. Did he prove that the amalgamation of the labor process of all capitalists into a single social labor process is compatible with private property, or that some solution to the contradiction is possible and conceivable other than that indicated by Marx? No, he did not say a word about this. On what then does his criticism rest? On manipulations, distortions, and on a spate of words which are nothing more than the noise of a rattle. How else, indeed, are we to characterize the methods employed by the critic who, after first talking of the nonsense about triple successive steps of history, demands of Marx with serious air, what next? What is to be done? I guess that will come in about 10 years. That is how will history proceed beyond that final stage of the process that he has described. Please note that from the very onset of this literary and revolutionary activities, Marx most definitely demanded that the sociological theory should accurately depict the real processes and nothing more. For instance, Communist Manifesto on the communist criterion of his theory. He strictly adhered to this demand in his Capital. He made it a task to give scientific analysis of the capitalist form of society, and there he stopped after showing that the development of this organization actually going on before our eyes, and such a tendency that it must inevitably perish and turn into another higher organization. But Mr. Michalowski evaded the whole substance of Marx's doctrine about his stupid question, what next? He adds profoundly, I must frankly confess that I'm quite clear what Engels' reply would be. We, however, on our part, must frankly confess, Mr. Michalowski, that we're quite clear about what the spirit and methods of such criticisms are. Or take the following argument. In the Middle Ages, Marx's individual property based on the proprietor's own labor was neither the only nor the predominant factor. It was actually feudalism that was predominant in the Middle Ages. But you know what abolished feudalism in England? The plague. Oh, battery went out. Give me 1 second.
All right. The plague. I knew that. My brain's not fully functioning this morning. Or afternoon, I should say. I woke up late. I was up in the middle of the night watching TikTok lives. Shouldn't do that. But
okay. This one has 100% battery, so it should stay longer. But yeah, it was the plague. Basically, too many workers died, and then the landlords had to give up some concessions because they didn't have enough work. 13 million people died in Europe.
Yeah. And it's always something like that, because you think about how we got the New Deal. You know what I mean? It's always just when it gets too desperate and they need to.
And then the threat of things being too desperate and the threat of the Soviet Union combined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why protests these days don't work. There's no Soviet Union for them to be scared of.
Yeah.
But also the U.S. had a very strong labor movement. Each labor union had its own newspaper, own radio station.
Yeah.
And many protested. They were using dialectical methods and materialism. They kind of understood the situation, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, that was that was, within the first wave. Prior to the first wave, and even right after the first wave, it kind of gave solidarity to some of the workers too, but then they just wore them down.
Yeah, no. World War II, they got a lot of war profits, and so they were. And again, this would not have happened before if it were not for the Soviet Union. But they were able to give American workers a higher standard of living with those World War II war profits, and then they just embourgeoisified them.
On that note, I just was reading because I've been looking. I'm trying to write up some history notes to do some videos, and I came across this. I use JSTOR, so I came across this article on or paper on how the German prisoners of war that were here and how they used them for labor. We had 380,000 of them.
Yeah.
And at the same time, concurrently, we were using this Bracero program with Mexico. So basically, we told the Mexicans, we need you guys, up here working. So we were having them come up and help work with the stuff because the Americans now could get, better jobs going into the factories of the, the military industrial complex and stuff like that. So they needed people in the fields doing all that work. But they have the Germans working, had the better jobs. Like the prisoners of war got the ones that were with the smaller farmers, with the, you know what I mean? And then
they
had
actually,
the Mexicans do this.
I read another really interesting article about this. So these weren't Nazi prisoners of war. They were Nazis. So imagine how racist they were. But when they came to the U.S., they were shocked by the racism, how Black people were treated. They're like, dudes, you guys are too far toned down. Many German, when they went back, they talked about the racism in the U.S. and they're like, whoa, that even shocked us. And we did the final solution.
Yeah. But it was interesting just looking at the two groups and how they were treated, even by the American citizens. The Nazi prisoners became friends with them. They were friendly.
Oh, yeah. That's exactly what happened with Black people, too. The Nazi prisoners were, invited for dinner and stuff. And, Yeah.
You're on, or take the final.
Even in the realm of even in the realm of economic relations, there was much more besides, but the dialectical method in Marx's interpretation, and not in Mr. Michalowski's garbled version of it, does not propose to returning to it. Why would anyone want to return to the Middle Age? Okay. It is obvious that all these schemes do not present a picture of historical reality or even of its proportions. They simply satisfy the tendency of the human mind to think of every object in its past, present, and future states. Even your way of distorting things, Mr. Michalowski, is monotonous to the point of nausea. I like Mean Lenin. He's really coming into himself now, right?
Yeah, he's I like when he gets all.
Yeah, he gets much meaner sooner. Mm-hmm. Into Marx's scheme, which claims to formulate nothing but the actual process of the development of capitalism. He first insinuates the intention of proving everything by triads, then declares that Marx's scheme does not conform to the plan foisted on it by Mr. Michalowski, and the third stage restores only one aspect of the first stage, omitting all others. Then, in the most blatant manner, draws the conclusion that the scheme obviously does not present a picture of historical reality. So that's like me claiming Janet's trying to prove theory of something by using trigonometry, when she's not trying to prove the theory of something, nor using trigonometry to not prove it.
Yeah.
Is there any serious polemic thinkable with the man who, as Engels said of Dühring, cannot quote accurately even by the way of exception? Can there be any arguing when the public is assured that the scheme obviously does not conform to reality without even an attempt being made to show its faultiness in any respect? Yeah, because it's really easy to show something does not conform with reality. It's like, you just show what reality is. He says X, but in reality, this is Y is happening.
Yeah, and that's why Diamat's so important, because you get to that point of showing them that's not reality. Like if they have oh, I'm thinking about doing this, and it's going to work this way, and you're like, yeah, but what about X, Y, and Z? You know what I mean? Yeah. And then, with just using the triad, you're not getting out of looking at the other stuff that can affect it.
Exactly. And you know how many times with libertarians you can defeat them in an argument by just asking, has there been any real life example of your crazy idea?
Yeah, we do that a lot on TikTok lives. Okay, you're using, we'll either not they'll shut them down from using well, hypothetically, and they're like, no, we're not working in hypotheticals. Give us like something that happened in history to prove your point. And you can't
Exactly.
do that.
Yeah, hypothetically, if everyone buys their own private fire department. No, Praxis Ben was arguing for private fire departments, and it's like, come on, that was just proven in ancient Rome.
Yeah.
Marcus Aurelius, he said, because it was he got money if each time he put out a fire, he would go and start fires.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
be like, how you just turned up here to help put it out.
Yeah. Look at how good I am putting out the fires. I started.
Yeah. But yeah, and Marx never deals with hypotheticals because everything he says has happened and continues to happen in 100 degrees worse than Marx ever imagined.
Yeah. Well, there's the other thing where they're mad because Marx didn't, like early on in this piece, they're like, Marx didn't talk about everything that happened in history. And like what it, okay.
Yeah, no, and the funniest is like Marx failed to say this, but then you find a quote of Marx that
I know.
actually.
Or if you play the game like Marx did it, like, oh, Marx predicted everything. No, not possible. And then like everything that comes up is like Marx predicted this, and you have like the little quote of where Marx was like talking about it.
Exactly. Yeah. I lost track of where I am.
Are we at instead, or were you partly into that paragraph? It goes, instead of criticizing the real content of Marx's views, I think it was somewhere within that.
Oh, no. Wait, any respect. Instead of it, that's exactly. Instead of criticizing the real content of Marx's views, Mr. Michalowski exercises his ingenuity on the subject of these categories, past, present, and future. Engels, for instance, argued against the eternal truths of Herr Düring and says that the morality preached to us today, a threefold morality, Christian, feudal, bourgeois, and proletarian, so that the past, present, and future have their own theories of morality. Yeah? In this connection, Mr. Michalowski reasons as follows. I think that the categories past, present, and future that lie at the basis of all triple divisions of history into periods. I mean, that's obvious. Like, past is history, present is present, and future is, we don't know, we predict. What profundity! Who does not know that if any social phenomenon is examined, its process of development, relics of the past, foundations of the present, and the germs of future will always be discovered in it? But Engels, for instance, did Engels, for instance, think of asserting that the history of morality, he was speaking, we know, only of the present, was confined to the three factors, indicated that feudal morality, for example, was not preceded by slave morality, and the latter by the morality of primitive communist community? Instead of seriously criticizing Engels' attempt to elucidate modern trends in moral ideas by explaining them materialistically, Mr. Michalowski treats us to the most empty phrasemongering. In respect of such methods of criticism employed by Mr. Michalowski, criticism which begins with the statement that he does not know where in what work the materialist conception of history is expounded, Das Kapital, it would be perhaps worthwhile to recall there was a time when the author knew one of these works and was able to appraise it more correctly. In 1877, Mr. Michalowski expressed the following opinion of Capital. If we remove from Capital the heavy, clumsy, unnecessary lid of Hegelian dialectics, how strange! How is it that Hegelian dialectics was unnecessary in 1877, while in 1894 it appears that materialism rests on the incontrovertibility of the dialectical process? Then, apart from the other merits of this essay, we shall observe in it splendidly elaborated material for an answer to the general question of the relation of forms of the material condition to their existence, and an excellent formulation of this question for a definite sphere. The relation of forms to the material conditions of their existence. Why? That is the very problem of the interrelation between various aspects of social life, of the superstructure of ideological social relations on the basis of material relations. A problem whose well-known solution constitutes the doctrine of materialism. Let's proceed. In point of fact, the whole of capital, my italics, is devoted to an inquiry. I wonder how they did my italics back then with just like print stamp prints. I don't know. It's devoted to an inquiry into how a form of society, once it has emerged, continues to develop, and it accentuates its typical features, subjugating itself and assimilating discoveries, inventions, and improvements in methods of production. New markets and science itself compels them to work for it, and how finally the given form cannot stand up against further changes in material conditions. An astonishing thing. And that's pretty impressive that Lenin was able to find like what he wrote in 1877, because it's not as simple as Googling like we do now. He'd have to like search through like individual art, look through, did Mr. Mikhailovsky write this in, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, he was definitely doing a lot of digging and reading. I mean, to get to these things, like he was looking through everything. Unless, I don't know, did he read it when he was really young and he just remembered? I don't know.
He could have done that. He would be 7.
Yeah, it was. When was he born?
1870.
Yeah, so he would only been 7 years old.
Yeah. No, I don't think he remembered. He dug and found. Like for us, it's so easy. It's like when I want to troll Maddie Clasius, I look at his different places have different labor laws, and that's okay. The day he after wrote about the Rana Plaza collapse that killed thousands, so I just kind of Google Maddie Glacias, and then this pops up.
Yeah, it's so much easier now.
Yeah, like this is a miracle that it's like finding a needle in a haystack.
Yep.
He was ahead of his time. He needed to be alive in the era of Twitter and Google.
Yeah. It's like when I'll go on newspapers.com just looking in general things for stuff to see what I come up with. But even then, like I'm searching a specific word, so the newspaper is bringing up everything, and then I can still search down. So I find some interesting stuff that way. I do it on JSTOR too. I like finding.
Yeah, I love old newspapers because like you find gems like that they would love to deny today.
Yeah. So.
It is in 18th, the whole of capital was devoted to materialist inquiry into a particular form of society. What else does materialism consist in, if not in explaining forms of society by material conditions? Whereas in 1894, it appears that it is not even known where in what work sought an exposition of this materialism should be sought. In 1877, Capital contained an inquiry into how a particular form, think the capitalist form cannot mark that, stand up against further changes in material conditions. Whereas in 1894, it turns out that there is no inquiry at all, and that the conviction that the capitalist form cannot withstand any further development of the progressive forces rests entirely at the end of the Hegelian triad. In 1877, Mr. Mikhailovsky wrote that the analysis of the relations of a given form of society to the material conditions of its existence will forever, my italics, remain a monument to the author's logical powers and vast erudition. Where in 1894, he declares that the doctrine of materialism has never and nowhere been scientifically verified and proved. An astonishing thing. What does it really mean? What has happened? Two things have happened. Firstly, the Russian peasant socialization of the 70s, which snorted freedom because of its clear bourgeoisie character, fought the clear-browed liberals who zealously covered up the antagonistic nature of Russian life. So basically, in 1860, feudalism was not kind of abolished, but not really abolished. I mean, they weren't formally tied to the land, but they had to work the land and pay for their freedom and so forth. And if you're a peasant, you're not going to be affording to pay your freedom.
Yeah.
So there was like a lot of Narodniks thought that these peasants would like somehow figure out a way to magically get free. I mean, it's not magical. Like they joined the Red Army and then they went with force and with the guns, and then they went to their landlord and be like, yo, vacate this palace. We're going to create a school here and a hospital here, and we're going to distribute the land better. And that's kind of what happened. But they thought that somehow these the Tsar had these collective land for really poor peasants, but that collective land was decided by the landlord, who gave them the crappiest land that they couldn't cultivate, and they didn't have any horses or cows or whatever.
Mhm.
So that idea of a peasant revolution, like spontaneously happening and building like a dream agrarian society, is just that, a dream.
Yeah.
And dreamed of a peasant revolution has completely decayed and has begotten that vulgar Philistine liberalism which discerns an encouraging impression that the progressive trends of peasant farming, forgetting that they are accompanied and determined by the wholesale expropriation of the peasantry. Yeah, just because like, and in the last article too, just because like there are 5 tractors in your village of like 10,000 acres or 100,000 acres, it doesn't mean most peasants are not going to be like starving and enslaved and working at like the landlord's land and whatnot. So yes, while there are some, if you look at the increased production, that has nothing to do with how the peasant lived compared to how the landlord lived. Secondly, in 1877, Mr. Michalowski was so engrossed in his task of defending the sanguine, the revolutionary socialist Marx, from the liberal critics that he failed to observe the incompatibility of Marx's method and his own. Oh yeah, and the Narodniks also had this really stupid idea of like skipping capitalism and just going to like a agrarian utopia with the peasants who didn't really have much. I mean,
that's kind of like the founding fathers, really. Like Thomas Jefferson wanted just an agrarian. Like they weren't actually pushing, not all of them were pushing like the industrial part of it. Like they really.
John Adams was pushing that.
Yeah, John Adams definitely was. But Thomas Jefferson really just wanted to go agriculture with the whole thing.
That's because he had lots of slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yeah, Narodniks kind of were pushing that, but when you don't have enough like farm animals, when you don't have enough land, instruments, like it's just not going to transition that way.
Yeah.
And then the irreconcilable contradiction between dialectical materialism and the subjective sociology was explained to him, explained by Engels' articles and books and by the Russian Social Democrats. One often meets with very apt comments on Mr. Michalowski in Plekhanov's writings. Oh, also, yeah, when Plekhanov turns into a Menshevik, Lenin starts trolling him, but now he's kind of respectful of him. And Mr. Michalowski insists, instead of seriously sitting down to reconsider the whole question, simply took a bit between his teeth, and instead of welcoming Marx as he did in 1872 and 1877, he now barks at him under the cover of dubious praise and rages and splutters against Russian Marxists for refusing to rest content with the defense of the economically weakest, with warehouses and improvements in the countryside. The warehouses were built to store all the grains that the landlords had that they weren't giving the peasants who were not getting food. With museums and art halls for handicraftsmen, and with similar well-meaning Philistine ideas of progress, and for wanting to remain sanguine people, advocates of social revolution, and to teach and guide and organize the really revolutionary elements of society. And of course, these people were just being very condescending to peasants and just creeping them out and not respecting them, of course.
So warehouses are just like a bastion of hoarding.
What?
Like the warehouse. So warehouses would just be like hoarding.
Exactly, by the landlords and not giving food to the peasants who are working their land.
Yeah. So like I know there was warehouses before capitalism, but like I bet that there's like a zillion times more warehouses than there should be.
Oh yeah. Yeah, but back then, like, there shouldn't have been warehouses because there was not that surplus food, because there in every village, like 40% were like starving.
Yeah.
At this brief excursion into the realm of the distant past, one may, we think, conclude this examination of Mr. Michalowski's criticism of Marxist theory. Let us try to sum up and recapitulate the critic's argument. The doctrine he set out to demolish is based firstly on the materialist conception of history and secondly on the dialectical method. As to the first, the critic began declaring that he did not know in which work materialism was expounded, capital. Not having found such an exposition anywhere, he set himself about concocting an explanation of what materialism is. In order to give an idea of the excessive claims of this materialism, he concocted the story that the materialist claims to have explained the entire past, present, and future of mankind. When it was subsequently shown by the reference to the authentic statements of Marxists that they regard only one social formation as having been explained, the critics decided that the materialists narrow the scope of materialism, whereby he asserts they defeat themselves. In order to give an idea of the methods by which this materialism has worked out, he invented the story that the materialists themselves have confessed to the inadequacy of their knowledge for the elaboration of the scientific socialism. Despite the fact that Marx and Engels confessed only to the insufficiency of their knowledge of economic history in general, and despite the fact that they never published the essay which testified to the insufficiency of their knowledge, after these preludes, we were treated to the criticism of itself. Capital was annihilated because it dealt only with one period, whereas the critic wants to have all periods, and because it did not affirm the economic materialism, but simply touched upon it. Arguments, evidently so weighty and serious as to compel the recognition that materialism has never been scientifically substantiated. The fact that it was cited against materialism that a man totally unconnected with this doctrine, having studied prehistoric times in an entirely different country, also arrived at the materialist conclusions. To show further that it was absolutely wrong to drag procreation into materialism, that this was nothing but a verbal artifice, the critic proceeded to prove that economic relations in a superstructure based on sexual and family relations. The statements made thereupon by our weighty critic for the edification of the materialists enriched us with the profound truth that the inheritance is impossible without procreation, that a complex psychology adheres to the product of this procreation, and our children are brought up in the spirit of their fathers. In passing, we also learned that nationalities are a continuation of generalization of Gentile ties. Continuing theoretical researches into materialism, the critic noted that the content of many of the Marxist argument consisted in assertion of that oppression and exploitation of the masses were necessary under the bourgeoisie regime, and that this regime must necessarily turn into a socialist regime, after which he hastened to declare that the necessity is too general a bracket if we omit what exactly people consider necessary, and that therefore Marxists are mystics and metaphysicians. The critic also declared that Marx's polemical against idealists was one-sided, but he did not say a word about the relation of these idealists' view to the subjective method and the relation of Marx's dialectical method materialism to these views. As to the second pillar of Marxism, the dialectical method, one push by the bold critic was enough to cast it to the ground, and the push was very well directed. The critic toiled and moiled with prodigious effort to disprove the notion that anything can be proved by triads, ignoring the fact that dialectical methods does not consist precisely of triads at all, but it consists precisely in the rejection of the methods of idealism and subjectivism in sociology. Another push was specifically directed at Marx with the help of the various Herr Dühring. Critic ascribed Marx to the incredible absurdity of having tried to prove the necessity of doom of capitalism by the means of triads, and then victoriously combating this absurdities. Such is the epic of our brilliant victories and our well-known sociologist. How very edifying, Buchanan, it was to contemplate these victories. We cannot refrain at this point from touching on another circumstance which has no direct bearing on the criticism of Marx's doctrine, but is extremely characteristic for an understanding of the critic's ideals and his conception of reality. His attitude to the working class movement in the West. Above quoted Mr. Michalowski's statement that materialism has not justified itself in science, perhaps in the science of the German friends of the people, but this materialism, argues Mr. Michalowski, is really spreading very rapidly among the working class. How does Mr. Michalowski explain this fact? The success, he says, enjoyed by economic materialism in breadth, so on to speak, and its dissemination in a critically unverified form are chiefly due to day-to-day practice established by the prospects of the future and not science. So this is basically trying to say, oh, the proles are too stupid to understand the deep critics within this.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, they are living the reality of capitalism. So they are more likely to understand the critiques of capitalism better because capitalism is like affecting them the worst.
Yeah.
What other means can there be in this clumsy phrase about practice established by the prospects for the future than that materialism is spreading, not because it correctly explains reality, but because it turns away from reality towards prospects? No, and again, like it explained more than just reality. It explained their reality, and that's why the working class were so keen on Marx.
Yeah, because it made sense to them because they were living it. Like, I mean, like that's the whole thing. You have a bunch of academics like talking on something, and if you don't have, the living experience, you're not fully getting it. So you have to listen to the people. You have to take from them what they're saying is happening and stuff like that. Like,
yeah. And then he goes on to say, these prospects require the German working class, which is adopting them, and of those who take a warm interest in its future, neither knowledge nor the effect of critical thinking. They require only faith. This is very condescending towards the working class. This is kind of like how Hillary Clinton was like, oh, the kids haven't done their research. That's why they support Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's all like, I mean, I can't say the word, infantilizing, like making workers like, you're too ignorant to know what's good for you. We know what's good for you. We have the answers for you.
And there's no faith required. Like, basically, Marx explained that, hey, this is what's going on, and if this process continues, everything will be owned by Amazon. Oh, he didn't say that, but that's basically what will happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then your wages are going to get lower, and you're going to work hard, blah blah blah. So then it's like, what is to be done next? It's like they kind of saw what's going on and what happens if the same process continues. So therefore, this process needs to be changed.
Yes.
In other words, the spread of materialism and scientific socialism in breadth is due to the fact that the doctrine promises the workers a better future. That sounds like a great reason for the workers to adopt this doctrine. But a most elementary acquaintance with the history of socialism and of the working class movement in the West is enough to reveal the utter absurdity and falsity of this explanation. Everybody knows that scientific socialism never painted any prospects for a future as such. It confined itself to analyzing the present bourgeoisie regime and to study the trends of development of the capitalist social organization, and that, we do not say to the world, Marx wrote as far back as 1843 that he fulfilled this program to the letter. We do not say to the world, cease struggling, your whole struggle is senseless. All we do is provide it with a true slogan of struggle. We show the world what it actually is struggling for, and consciousness is a thing which must acquire whether it likes it or not. Everybody knows that capital, for instance, the chief and basic work in which scientific socialism is expounded, restricts itself to the most general allusions to the future and merely traces those already existing elements from which a future system grows. Everybody knows as far as the prospects for the future are concerned, incomparably more was contributed by earlier socialists, who described a future society in every great detail, designed to inspire mankind with a picture of a system in which people get along without conflict, in which their social relations are based not on exploitation, but on the principles of progress that conform to the conditions of human nature. Nevertheless, despite the whole phalanx of very talented people who expounded these ideas, and despite the most firmly convinced socialists, their theories stood aloof from life, and their programs were not connected with the political movement of the people, united until large-scale machine industry drew the mass of proletarian workers into the vortex of political life, until the true slogan of their struggle was found. This slogan was found by Marx not utopian, but a strict and in places even dry scientist. And as Mr. Michalowski called him in the long distant past in 1872. It was certainly not founded by a means of prospects, but by a scientific analysis of the present bourgeoisie regime, by an elucidation of the necessity of exploitation under this regime, by an investigation of its laws of development. Mr. Michalowski may, of course, assure the readers of Ruskaya Bogatstvo, Russian wealth, that neither knowledge nor an effort of thinking is required to understand this analysis. But we have already seen in his own case, and shall see it to the greater extent in the case of his economist collaborator, So gross a lack of understanding of the elementary truths established by this analysis that such a statement, of course, can only provoke a smile. It remains an indisputable fact that the working class movement spreads and develops precisely where, to the extent that large-scale capitalist machinery industry develops. The socialist doctrine, which is successful precisely when it stops arguing about social conditions that conform to human nature and sets about making a materialist analysis of contemporary social relations and explaining the necessity for the present regime of exploitation. Having tried to evade the real reasons for success of materialism among the workers by ascribing the attitude of this doctrine to prospects in a manner directly contrary to the truth, Mr. Mikhailovsky goes off to scoff in the most vulgar and philistine way at the ideas and tactics of the Western European working class movement. As we have seen, he was unable to adduce a single argument against Marx's proof of the inevitability of the capitalist system being transformed into a socialist system as a result of the socialization of labor. And yet he jeers in the most blatant manner at the idea of an army of proletarians preparing to expropriate the capitalists, whereupon all class conflict will cease and peace on earth and goodwill among men will reign. He, Mr. Mikhailovsky, knows far simpler and surer paths to achievement of socialism than this. All that is required is that the friends of the people should indicate in greater detail the clear and unalterable paths of the desired economic evolution, and then these friends of the people will most likely be called in to solve practical economic problems. See the article Problems of the Economic Development by Mr. Yuzhikov in Russkaya Bogatstvo, Russian Wealth, number 11. And meanwhile, the workers must rely on the friends of the people, and not begin with the unjustified self-assurance and independent struggle against the exploiters. Desiring to strike a death blow at this unjustified self-assurance, our author waxes highly indignant at this science that can almost fit into a pocket dictionary. How terrible, indeed, science and social democratic penny pamphlets that can fit into the pocket. It is not obvious how unjustifiably self-assured are those who value science insofar as it teaches the exploited to wage an independent struggle for their emancipation and teaches a way to keep away from all friends of the people, engaged in glossing over class antagonism, and a desire of taking the whole business upon themselves, those who therefore expound the science in penny publications which so shock the Philistines. How different would it be if workers placed their fate on the hands of the friends of the people? They would show them a real voluminous university and Philistine science. They would acquaint them in detail with the social organization that conforms to human nature, provided only the workers agreed to wait and did not begin the struggle with an unjustified self-assurance.
Hey, we finished part 1.
6 pages long, by the way.
Yeah, that was a long one. Like I was saying to Asha, like basically when I was doing like my study group book club, like we would listen on Speechify so every 20 pages was about an hour. So Asha did most of that reading, so she read like 3.5 hours.
Exactly. But this kind of reminds me of what Martin Luther King talked about, the drug of gradual
tranquility.
Tranquil gradualism.
Yep.
Yeah, and of course, liberals have been telling workers, oh, just wait, work hard, and eventually everything will trickle down to you, and nothing trickles down. Things actually trickle up.
Yeah. It also kind of, like I follow a lot of like Appalachians and stuff on TikTok, and what they talk about a lot is, the people coming in saying, we know what to do. You don't know what you're doing. And the Appalachians are like, no, that like every single time that they come in to try to fix things, they make everything worse for them,
Exactly. Because those people don't really care about Appalachians, or like they don't even understand what conditions they're going through and why.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, so exactly. So like it seems like Mr. Mikhailovsky is offended by Marx's theory of having an army of proletarian workers fighting against the bourgeoisie.
Mm-hmm. And then the difference between like a Lenin, like Lenin spent time with the people. He was teaching.
Oh yeah. So this is very interesting. This is actually the difference between Lenin and Trotsky. Trotsky was kind of not very friendly for peasants. Like he thought that they were rough on the edges, backwards, whatever. But Lenin, when he was in Siberia in exile, he spent time with all the peasants and learned about their struggle, learned about all their problems. And so he understood that they were actually very revolutionary, even if they didn't use the right terms or said some uncouth things. So he saw and of course, population-wise, there's no way Russia could have a revolution with just the proletariat when there's like 2 million proletariats and 150 million peasants.
Yeah. No, they definitely needed to use the peasants on that one.
But it was lucky because in World War I, of course, the Tsar, the main class that they drafted from was from the poor peasants. And then like their conditions in World War I was just horrible. So a lot of the poor peasants were transformed by the Bolsheviks, and they were like, okay, I'm ready to turn my gun.
Yeah. So sometimes that's what it takes is someone to go to the military and them, you know, I wonder what percentage of them come back and are just like, F that, man.
Well, okay. So there were 80% of all the draftees were from the poor peasant class, because the Tsar had like 10,000 exceptions for rich people. Like, oh, I have a little cough. Oh, I'm like studying art, basket weaving, whatever. There were 10,000 exceptions. And so what happened was that, like, I think they drafted like an 8 million strong army in the beginning. And after 1 year, about 2 million just deserted. They're like, F this. And they just checked out.
Okay.
Many were, and then the Tsar didn't have enough weapons. So many were like congregated here in Petrograd, just like in awful barracks, just getting cholera, diphtheria, and just being miserable and things like that. And the Bolsheviks were here too. So many of the reservists, they were able to like convert, like just explain to them what was going on. And they're like, oh, deal. And so that's what happened. So many did just check out. Some went back home. Some just like hung out.
It's funny, the numbers that you use are 800, and then that 200 million of them like deserted. And
not 2 million. 8 million. I
8 million. Sorry, I said the 100. You said it right. You said 8 and 2. But like I was in my head, I was like, I bet it's like 20%, and that was be 25%. So that's pretty close to my guesstimate.
And then it's funny because the like the other parties, like cadets and stuff, it's like, will you die for the Tsar? And it's like, no, I would not. Why would I die for this inbred SOB?
Yeah. And that's the other thing. If you think about like how many, you know, there's 300 and whatever, almost 50 million Americans now, right? So 340, over 340.
No, more like 390.
There's 390 of us now?
I think so. Let's check.
But I mean, how much of that population? Because we see not even half the people that are voting age voting.
Oh no, you're right. 340 million. Why did I think 390? I must be thinking of a different country.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I mean, we'll be up there soon enough because we've gone 10 million just since we were 330 10 years ago. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah. India surpassed China like earlier this year, so as the most populated country.
India does?
Yeah.
Oh, I did not know that. Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, but I mean, like, how many Americans really would fight for the system we have? Like, even the ones that are like, they're not like communists and stuff. They don't like our system. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't think like if they had to actively fight to preserve this system, like, no, it's just inertia. Many won't do anything to change it, but the system runs on inertia. Like, no one's going to fight to preserve this system.
Yeah. Because
without being forced to and bribed and so on.
Like, Vietnam opened up so many people's eyes. You know what I mean? Like, that's really where and I don't know, the television probably had a big part of it, but I just feel like no one really has that much faith in in the government in the United States, besides the politicians themselves.
Yeah, besides people that, not even Republican Party, like they know that what the government is. They kind of do the workaround. Like it's only like Democratic Party people, like process, ideology, blah blah blah. Yeah. Like that's why Hillary Clinton's slogan "America's already great" was so out of touch.
Yeah, I mean, "Make America Great Again" was out of touch enough. Like,
no, the only part out of touch is the again part, like because it recognizes there's a problem.
Yes, yeah, but that America was, I mean, for a lot of people, well, maybe not. I mean, maybe that's a smaller percentage. That's just people I know are like, we were never great.
No, that's like I said, the again part is the problem there. Not the "Make America Great" part recognizes there's a problem.
Yeah. Yep. So.
But yeah, it's really funny. But yeah, it's like the same kind of classism always exists. Like, it's always like, oh, the kids too, like against Israel Palestine. Like, there's like so much condescension. Like Jake Tapper, like, oh, the kids do not know what they're fighting. It's like, no, they don't know exactly what they're protesting.
Yeah. I mean that's the other thing. Like I like laugh because I work with, I mean, you're much younger than me too, but I mean, I work with people that are much younger than me. And I'm always like, when I was like in my 20s, I had people in my 50s calling me a kid. And I was like, I can't wait till I'm 50 and I can call 20-year-olds kids. And now I'm like, I can't call them kids because they're not kids. They're adults. And so I'm like, it's not fair. But like, I wouldn't. I mean, I did. Yeah. I called, someone I was trolling a child the other day, but that's a different.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that back then people thought people became more conservative as they aged because the system, like as they aged, like they got more material benefits and they became bourgeois. But now that system of social security, all that doesn't exist anymore. So there's no reason for older people to become bourgeois. In fact, I get angrier as I age.
Yes, I am definitely more and more as I'm aging. So
the materialist conditions.
Yeah, and I wish during all that time that I was working so much that I was studying this stuff too, but I couldn't do reality stuff. Like when I needed to read fiction because I couldn't deal with reading, and I always loved history and stuff like that, but I just was not reading it because I needed to like get away from my life I was working all the time. So like, I don't know, like I feel like there's a push not to educate yourself, like we really, that's a big thing. Like people in especially America need to educate themselves. Like they need to take up that task.
Exactly. And young people have access to all them, like they don't have the same ideological pinnings and the same brainwashing. So they are getting a lot more information and
I feel like the anti-communism, because they felt like in the early 90s that they defeated communism, the anti-communism wasn't the same either as it was on me or as, on you as a youth too. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it was a little lighter or it was more covert than overt. Like
yes, because back then they thought they were going to do to China what they did to Russia, and they didn't realize how smart Deng was. Mm-hmm. But yes, that's and then like after 9/11, if they needed a new excuse to start war, they needed to use Islamic terrorism, and so. But I think that's one part, and also the access to information. Suddenly, like all the Soviet archives becomes declassified, and then you're like, oh. Sounds like Soviets were right most of the time, and like I think that access to information that like young people of the 1980s like didn't have. I think
Yeah.
that helped too.
I think like it was the 80s are so really. I keep going back to it. I keep thinking of like it was just coming out of that civil rights. So if you were born in Gen X, if you're an older, any Gen X, right? You got this whole sense like the adults were telling you they fixed everything.
But they were making it worse, and then like starting from the 1980s, they were making every civil rights gain, they were making it worse.
Yes, yeah, and you were seeing that with your eyes, and you're like, what? Like, this is making no sense. And so, like, as a teenager, I was just looking at things like, you guys are saying stuff, and I am seeing something different, and that's me living in a white suburb. You know what I mean? Like, I was even seeing it. So I can't even imagine someone that was, living in a poor area or, was a, Black person or something like that. Like they were definitely not seeing the stuff. Like I experienced as a woman.
Like I said, with Ronald Reagan, it actually got worse. Like schools became more segregated. People became poor. Wealth, everything became worse.
Yeah. Yep.
And then Clinton just took it on steroids, and Bush, and so on. So I agree. Like I said, there's more access to information. I think that helps. More international dialogue. Like I think that just kind of helps people be more situated in a more dialectical material and less under idealism.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's still bright and sunny outside.
You're getting into white nights now, aren't you?
Yep, the sun comes up at 3 a.m. and oh God, it's so hard to sleep. But with that, have a good week, and we'll be back next week.
Hi, everyone.
Bye, everyone.